Hi, Steve Albrecht, and welcome to Crime Time. This is Crime Time Podcast episode number 70, joining you from Springfield, Missouri today. For this episode, we'll be talking about guns and guns around us, not really a gun control discussion or a gun ownership discussion, but about guns in general and how they are part of the landscape around us. And maybe you don't know that there are people around you carrying guns all the time. What I learned in my time in the cops is that many people carry guns for protection, but don't say anything to the police when they are stopped. And this includes women. Some of the women that you know in your life may carry guns that you don't even know. They're in their purse or backpack or pocket or hidden on their body in some sort of holster. And they do this for personal protection, but they've not said anything to you about it. So that's possible. And I want to talk to you a little bit about guns around us and what it kind of all means. So thanks for listening to Crime Time, where we talk about crime and crooks and cops and personal security. We'll talk about dangerous people and a few heroes, and we'll even mention a couple of stupid crooks out there. Most importantly, we'll talk about what you can do to keep yourself and your family safe from crime and violence. You need to be vigilant at home and in your neighborhood and in your community, and certainly at school if you go to school, and at work, and even on the road. Road rage is popular these days. This show exists to make you feel more empowered, more secure, and more educated on security issues and the criminal justice system. As background, I worked for the San Diego Police Department for 15 years as a patrol officer and a reserve sergeant and a domestic violence investigator. I now work as a training consultant, teaching training workshops and focusing on human resources and employee coaching and workplace violence and security issues at work. I've written 25 books on business and workplace violence and police subjects and guns, all of which you can find on Amazon on my author's page. You can always reach me at my website, crimetimeradio.com. Send me an email. You can always connect with me at Twitter at Dr. Steve Albrecht. So that's Dr. Steve Albrecht, or on LinkedIn at Dr. Steve Albrecht as well. You can also listen to past shows of Crime Time on YouTube. I post them every week. So let's think about guns. Guns in the neighborhood that you're walking through with your dog, guns when you are driving through the parking lot at school or at work or in the supermarket. When you think about guns that people are carrying legally and illegally, we'll talk a little bit about that all over the place. When you look at the state laws for guns, they're increasingly more moving towards, especially in the states that have always been kind of gun friendly, middle of the country especially, they're moving towards more open carry legislation that allows for that. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. We're also seeing people move towards, states move towards, and governors in those states move towards less concealed carry restrictions. Where I came from in California, concealed carry now, of course, still requires a permit, but in states where I'm at, like Missouri, for example, lots of other states where concealed carry does not require a permit, or if it does require a permit, the ability to get one is pretty easy. And so when you look at other states where they're really strict gun laws, we have this argument all the time, of course, in our society that states with very strict gun laws, California, New York, DC, Illinois, have lots of crime. And so the science fiction writer, Robert Heinlein, it was not Thomas Jefferson, it was Heinlein, the science fiction writer, who said an armed society is a polite society. That is up for debate, and we certainly have too many gun crimes and certainly too many workplace violence incidents, especially recently. Have we seen two horrific mass murders in California? And the number of shootings in states around this country continues to go up. And that makes the argument with the gun rights people versus the anti-gun rights people just so much more polarizing, like any other subject in this country, whether it's the death penalty or abortion or immigration or what we do about the homeless. I mean, there's always just so many people on either sides that are screaming in these issues. And it's not my function to go through every single state and divide up which states are pro-gun and which case states are not pro-gun. You can tell by looking at a map yourself. But I want you to think about some ways that you may encounter people with guns in the world. Some folks are CCW, carrying a concealed weapon with a permit, and you'll never know. Their gun is carefully concealed in a holster, and that's something we'll talk about in some detail. When you look at how guns are carried by crooks, they typically don't use holsters. They just shove them into a waistband or into a pocket or behind their back, shoved into their waistband in a kind of spine carry. When you look at people that do open carry, oftentimes this is done as a way to be provocative, to challenge law enforcement who responds to these situations, to be provocative at the Starbucks, to be provocative in stores or in restaurants or places where they bring oftentimes rifles in, semi-autos and hunting rifles and things like that. We also have permitless carry, which is people who have not needed to, because of the state laws in their state, needed to get a concealed weapons permit. They carry their guns hidden as well. And then we have something called exposed carry, which is not necessarily rifles and shotguns and semi-auto assault weapons and things that we see people do sometimes that carrying around on a sling, but they're just exposed carry with a pistol. It'll just be hanging out of their holster or hanging out of their pocket as they go about their business. I've seen, when I was living in Colorado, female real estate agents, many of them with exposed carry firearms on their body as they go to show houses, which, shows that they're concerned about their safety when they're in an empty house with a stranger who meets them online and says, hey, I want to look at this property. They have no idea who these people are or what they're all about. So I get that. When we look at something called soft carry is when people who are not crooks, and again, I define most crooks as carrying guns not without a holster. Most of the ones I ever saw in my police career anyway, there's no need for a holster. Soft carry is where people put their gun into their waistband or somehow secured onto their body with, a belt or something like that, where they're hoping that it doesn't fall out onto the ground. And I'm not a big fan of soft carry. I know some cops who do it, but I don't think it's the wisest thing to do. The reason for that, of course, is that a holster provides two functions. One, to keep the gun from falling out as you are transponding through your day. You're walking around, running around. Your gun doesn't fall out at the supermarket or at some other inopportune place. Or the other reason for holsters is, and this is the one I like, actually two reasons, the one I like the most. One is that oftentimes we see holsters with a top strap that keeps the gun protected from falling out of the holster, but also that the strap design will prevent any kind of coverage of the trigger that is exposed. And so you see sometimes holsters that don't have this coverage where the trigger is exposed. Sometimes we see negligent discharges when people reach their hands in to grab their gun. So well-manufactured, used holsters are ones that cover the trigger of the firearm itself, and then also have a top strap that keeps the pistol in place or the revolver in place as well. So you may hear the phrase accidental discharge and you can see the videos all over YouTube. Sometimes people do ADs, accidental discharge at the range or in some other inopportune place like a restaurant. The more accurate phrase is really negligent discharge, which is this person was negligent in the use of their firearms, and that's how they got their finger onto the trigger and pulled the trigger and shot themselves or somebody else, or shot the ceiling or a hole in the ground. If you look at these videos, which can be quite disturbing sometimes and certainly frightening for everybody involved, the negligent discharge is someone does not realize that when they put pressure on the trigger strong enough to fire the weapon, then the gun's going to do what it always does, which is cycle forward and fire the weapon by putting the firing pin onto the primer of the round. So much easier to fire a negligent discharge round if you have a semi-auto without a safety. Those are Glocks, certainly. That's the hallmark of the Glock, is the safety is built into the trigger. But if you see people that don't use safeties or have concealed carry involving model 1911 45s, where they are cocked and locked and there's the hammer is back and ready to fall forward onto the round, those are pretty common for negligent discharges. And also where people have cocked revolvers and carried those in their pockets or in holsters, or in just negligence and reaching in and not understanding how the gun works in terms of where to put your finger along the slide, so you don't put your finger into the trigger well until you're ready to shoot the firearm. That's where negligence comes in on negligent discharge. So the question I'm asking in this conversation is every visible gun that you see mean danger? And the answer is not necessarily. So I'll give you an example in my work. I do a lot of things with libraries, and sometimes people in the library world, the library employees and leaders, will call up and say, this guy came in and he was getting some books out of a top shelf and he lifted up his jacket to get the books, and we saw a firearm in a holster and we got quite concerned. I said, okay, guns in the library is not a great thing, but context is important, and context of why this person is in the library with a firearm is really important. Is this somebody who's a responsible gun owner who's got a concealed carry permit and is doing something which most people that have concealed carry permits and CCW enthusiasts don't want to do, which is printing the gun, meaning the gun is visible from outside when people look at their clothing, the outline of the holster, outline of the gun, or it's visible if they move in some way where their jacket opens or their jacket uncovers the firearm. Most people that carry concealed don't want to do that, me included. So I always look at the context and say, is this person bringing a firearm into the library to intimidate people, to show everybody that they're a tough guy because they have a gun? Or are they bringing the firearm into the library to shoot somebody who they have a grudge against? Gang members, criminals, people that are mentally ill, people that have some grudge against somebody inside the facility. And that's not just libraries, but everywhere, hospitals and businesses and banks and shopping malls and places like that where we've seen mass shootings. But also, is it unintentional behavior or intentional behavior? And if it is unintentional behavior, usually the person covers up. Or if you say, hey, your gun is showing, they go, oh, I'm sorry, and they're embarrassed and they cover up. So context is critical. Not every gun that's visible means that person's there to use it in a disturbing, tragic way. Again, I go back to my sort of rule of thumb, at least when I was in the cops and now, is if I see the holster of the person that's wearing a holster and carrying a gun, I'm perhaps less concerned. I'm always vigilant, but I'm less concerned compared to somebody who does not have a holster, who has a gun jammed into their waistband. So you see ways that people carry handguns. It's typically the most common is what we would call appendix carry. That's in between your usually on the right side of your body where your appendix is, in between your hip bone and your belly button, right around there. You see people carrying in holsters on hip carry. Sometimes we have OWB, or outside the waistband, versus IWB, or inside the waistband. There are pros and cons for both. Most people who carry concealed carry inside the waistband, so the gun is more covered. You can carry outside the waistband so that the holster is outside, hanging on your belt, as long as you're covering it with some other garment like your jacket. Some people carry cross draw, which is appendix in reverse, which is the gun is on the opposite side of their strong or dominant or shooting hand, in which case they pull it crossways from their left side, in between their hip bone of their left side if they're right-handed, and their belly button. Some people carry guns in the back of in their back, around that sort of small of the back area where they can get a holster in there, or sometimes they just put it in, carry it jammed into that area along your spine and your belt. Some people carry what's called a holster rig or a shoulder rig. And that's kind of the dirty, hairy or 60s, 70s cop thing where guys are carrying, mostly guys. I've not seen a woman carry a shoulder holster before. That doesn't mean they don't, but I've not seen it. Where they're carrying a shoulder holster rig where the gun is under their armpit of their non-dominant side. So if they're right-handed, it would be under their left armpit. Shoulder holsters can be a little disturbing to look at because in some of the designs, the gun barrel is facing under the person's armpit out towards their back and pointing at you if they're standing behind you. Sometimes the shoulder holster rig will point the barrel of the gun down along the person's side. So there are different ways that those are designed. Some people carry guns, and I do this frequently myself, especially in the wintertime, in ankle holster. I've always used an ankle holster, especially starting in my police days. The value for an ankle holster is that no one sees it is there. Obviously, you don't wear it when you're wearing short pants, of course, or a bathing suit. But when you're wearing an ankle holster with jeans or other long pants on, it offers coverage in ways people don't even ever look at. No one ever looks at ankle holsters. No one ever looks for a gun down by somebody's feet. That's why I do it. And I can carry my 45, my small frame Glock 45, on my ankle holster quite comfortably. And the reason I do that is because it's unobtrusive, and it doesn't stand out, and it doesn't draw attention to itself as a holster along my waistband would. I remember going to some concert once where I didn't realize you couldn't bring a firearm into the concert. And the guy was at the door, was a security guard with a metal detecting wand, a handheld. These are usually called Butler. That's the main manufacturer, handheld wand. And he scanned me and didn't go down past my kneecaps, and so missed the gun that was on my ankle holster. And I went into the concert and didn't bother anybody, but for people that are crooks, this is, or want to harm folks in public environments like that, if we have somebody operating a metal detector, a handheld one, then by God, they better go all the way down to the person's toes and back up again. So in this situation, this person did not. So when we look and say that most reasonable gun owners don't want to be the kind of folks that draw attention to themselves at the coffee shop, Not that people that carry open carry with rifles and things are intentionally trying to cause problems or be provocative, but sometimes that's their goal. They want a confrontation with somebody about the gun ownership discussion or with the police when they get there. It's always raises everybody's nerves. And then the other issue is that when we see people that are carrying guns for personal protection, then they don't want the bad guy to know that they're armed as well. And so most people that are concealed carry are not drawing attention to say, look, if there's somebody who is open carry, carrying a gun on their waistband outside their clothing, or carrying a gun in some sort of a rifle in some sort of sling, then that's a good way to get shot by a bad guy who's intent on harming people, robbing people, killing people, whatever it happens to be. So there are other ways to carry. We talked about holsters, and we talked about soft carry, which I think is dangerous because it falls out. We talked about the value of holsters. We talked about appendix, inside waistband, outside waistband, behind the back, small of the back, something like that. People often carry guns in holsters, which are called body bands. Women do this as well. It's a band that's fairly wide, maybe 6 or 8 inches, and it kind of goes across your entire waist area in a Velcro type style that has a holster built into it. Some men do this as well. Women like the design because it's kind of smoothing and doesn't print the gun. Other ways that people carry guns is off body, which would be in backpacks or purses or fanny packs. Fanny packs are pretty popular back in the old days, and sometimes they make a comeback, but usually fanny packs or carry bags. You see these in tactical shops, and you see them online sometimes. Men and women will carry these. Off body, the gun is inside there, fanny packs, purses, and backpacks. So when I think about those ways to carry a gun off body, my biggest concern is leaving that bag with the gun in it somewhere in a public place, a restaurant, back of a rental car, a cab, Uber, whatever it happens to be. It can be dangerous because if someone can pickpocket or grab or purse snatch your fanny pack, purse, or backpack from you, snatch it off of your body, then they've got a firearm. The other thing too is sometimes, well, a couple of things. One, that it really draws attention, at least to people like me, that there might be a gun in there. Most people don't carry things around. Women carry purses, obviously, but most people don't carry a fanny pack around these days. And unless, at least from my perspective, I think there might be something in there like a firearm. That's not common to see people carry those. And the second thing is that in these types of situations where someone wants to get access to a firearm that they're carrying off body, like on a fanny pack or a purse or a backpack, it can be difficult to fish them out sometimes. They can get tangled or stuck, and they're hard to move. So most people, when they carry firearms, the more common way is certainly with holsters instead of with off-body carry bags, things like that. So does that mean everybody you see who's carrying a purse is carrying a firearm? Not necessarily. Is everybody that you see is carrying some sort of bag or off-body carry, is it necessarily a firearm, a leather satchel or something like that? Not necessarily, but it's possible. So when you think about holsters and guns, it's all about personal comfort. But my thing is really people who want to carry a gun that want to be safe about it are going to use a holster. People who don't want to be safe and are reckless in their behavior, in my opinion, either soft carry, good guys and girls, or soft carry, bad guys and girls, which is typically gang members and folks like that. So when you look at people carrying firearms around you, you can sometimes use and you discover this, you could sometimes use what therapists call therapeutic wonderment questions. Therapeutic wonderment questions are asked in sort of a naive way, like you don't know the answer. Like, I'm confused. What's with the rifle inside the Starbucks? And you can, in fact, if you want to, engage with somebody, because oftentimes they will tell you their strong opinions as to why they have done it. It's about personal protection and about freedom and the Second Amendment and about anti-government, rights and this and that. And I get it. I've said this to people in work situations where they come across someone who has a gun, and it can be startling, but also you have to keep your wits about you and say, can I find out in a reasonable contextual way why this person has brought a firearm into my business? Now, if you're in a city or a county or a state where that's much more common, maybe it's not such a big deal to you. But in other places where guns are still raising eyebrows when someone brings a firearm into a private business, the private business owner has the right to say, either you can't have that here, or what's the purpose of it in my business? And so when I look at these situations, context is also critical with the police department. And so I say to my clients, if you're going to call the cops about somebody coming into a public business, and most of my clients are government, public government office that has an exposed firearm, you have to ask and speak to the dispatchers in a careful way. You could say, there's a guy with a gun in the library, or a guy with a gun in City Hall, get here right away if it's an actually terrorizing workplace violence potential situation. Or you say, could you send a patrol officer here? We need to figure out what's going on. We have this guy, he's got a concealed firearm. He doesn't seem dangerous to us right now, but it's making people uncomfortable that know about it. And you come and help sort this out and figure out what's going on. And the police will do that. Now, obviously, the first response is going to be a tactical response to the potential for somebody who being an active shooter. And the second one may be much more guarded or careful response. The police are going to come in and not burst in the door, but they're going to come in, assess the situation, assess the person who has the firearm, make sure this person keeps his or her hands away, and they have a careful conversation. Sometimes they will disarm this person and return the gun to them after it's been run for being stolen or something like that, or they verify the person's permit or whatever it happens to be for that particular state or county law before they return the firearm. So when I look at the conversation with the police dispatcher, is it a dangerous, life-threatening situation versus a disturbing or anxiety-creating situation? And in the life-threatening situation, we would certainly evacuate everybody and get people out and have the person contacted by the police in an arrest manner so that they don't end up injuring or killing the cops or anybody else, including themselves. In the second scenario, the police would talk to them in a controlled, careful way. We may move everybody away from that person until the police get there and have a conversation about what the purpose of that gun is. And the reason we have these same discussions, two different discussions in the same kind of situation, person with a gun, is kind of like what the cops face in a traffic stop, which is the police usually, or they should, I always did, assume that everybody they talk to is armed. Everybody they talk to is armed in some way, either a knife or a gun or some other way, and until they can determine otherwise, that's a useful way to do it. So sometimes the police will make traffic stops knowing that someone has a gun because the person says, I have a concealed weapons permit, there's a gun on my ankle or on my waistband or in my glove compartment. The cops will say, okay, let's see your permit. Don't show me the gun. We'll get to that stage in a second. Sometimes they may ask the person to step out. They'll retrieve the gun themselves, or they will pat the person down and retrieve the gun that way and verify the ownership, things like that. Or they will say nothing and say, okay, thanks for telling me, but don't put your hands anywhere near the gun during this entire traffic stop. So it all sort of depends on the context of that situation. But in my patrol career, I tried to get into the habit of asking everybody that I stopped in California anyway, do you have a gun in this car? And sometimes the answer was yes. And in the beginning of my career, I didn't make ask that question. I didn't make that connection that I should ask everyone if they have a firearm. Sometimes the person would stop for a mere traffic issue, and you would say, well, what would you ask for a firearm for? Well, because of officer safety. And you say, okay, if the person has a concealed weapons permit or is legally authorized to carry this, they're an off-duty cop or something like that, or a retired cop or something like that, that's fine. But I want to know about it as I'm having the conversation with this person, what we're doing here. So the sheriff is the issuer in most counties of choice of the concealed weapons permit in the United States. There's lots of controversy amongst sheriff counties around the United States as to this county tends to be more flexible about concealed weapons issuing. This county is not. San Diego, during my time when I lived there, was not at all flexible in terms of concealed weapons permits for people, even with folks with really valid reasons for it. Other counties in California, more rural counties or counties that are smaller, less crime, the sheriff was much more cognizant of the fact of being an elected official. He or she was much more flexible about concealed weapons permits. So usually the sheriff is the person that you deal with. The sheriff's office is the person you deal with if you want a concealed weapons permit in your particular county. So when you look at the counties or the states of counties that are typically much more stringent, you could have all kinds of reasons that you think are valid for getting a concealed weapons permit. You're not going to get one. Others that are much looser. Anybody that passes the background check and is not a felon and things like that meets certain age requirements. Sometimes there are counties or states that require that you demonstrate range compliance. I like that. I think that's a decent idea. So when you look at the way guns are around you, you could see people that are into open carry or what's called constitutional carry with their rifles, shotguns, and ARs. You could see people that are into outside the waistband carry, or people that are quite covered. Their guns are well holstered and carried in bags or body bands or ankle holsters or shoulder rigs or things like that, where you don't see them. And so all I'm saying is vigilance is really important when it comes to guns in general. You want to look at the context of the situation. You're not having a 20-minute contextual conversation with somebody who wants to shoot people. But not everybody who's carrying a gun that you see in public is dangerous. The challenge for us, of course, is to figure out who is, and that's what the function of the police and a vigilant society is all about. Time for one of my favorite parts of Crime Time, the stupidest crook of the week. A Florida man. Why are all the cases in Florida? A Florida man was arrested for burglary and grand theft while he was wearing an ankle monitor. So this guy in Broward County was already wearing a GPS ankle monitor for another pending case of grand theft auto, and he was arrested coming out of a South Miami home with some other people that are trying to break into a car, and they broken into the house. They were arrested, and this guy was brought into custody. He was already wearing an ankle bracelet. So I guess maybe we have to put another one on his other ankle. So that's our stupid crook of the week. We get to talk about people and their monumental stupidity. The other thing, which I think is kind of fun, let's do our Crime Time quiz here. Our Crime Time quiz is asking question this week about what are some of the slang names that you have heard for jails or prisons. Think of all the movies that you have watched, whether you're an old movie fan like me, Humphrey Bogart and Edward G. Robinson and Jimmy Cagney and things like that. Movies that you saw in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And then recent films, especially stuff that's international, crime heist movies and things like that. They have different phrases for jail or prison in England than they do here. In England, they call the jail the Nick, N-I-C-K. But what are some of the names that you think about for a jail or prison in the United States? How about the can, the stir, the pokey? How about the hoosgow, the bucket, the jug, the lockup, the pit, the Gray Bar Hotel, the Iron Bar Hotel, the Crossbar Hotel, the Sheriff's Hotel? Sheriff usually runs the jail. The box, the cooler, the clink, CJ for county jail, right? So when you think about all the movies that you have seen, think about the phrases that you have heard. Remember the phrases that you have heard from people that are thinking about or talking about jail or prison. That's kind of cool, all the slangs. So this week's Crime Time safety tip is all about guns and gun safety for a couple things. One, not just the gun itself. The firearm itself is important to secure, and that would be trigger locks and cable locks or gun safes. Gun safes is my preference, especially big ones that can't be carried away or unbolted and moved. Ones that are huge and can't be moved or accessed by anybody, especially children. But the other thing that you need to be accountable for as a gun owner is the rounds, the ammunition, the bullets. And so little kids messing around with bullets with some type of hammer or a screwdriver or anything like that could end up hitting the firing pin and injuring or killing themselves or somebody else. Or the bullets themselves can be opened by people that know how to pry them apart. There's gunpowder inside there, and it's all kinds of dangerous. And so I've seen kids messing around with shotgun rounds. I've seen kids messing around with revolver 38 rounds and also with 9mm rounds. So the Crime Time safety tip of this week is, if you are a responsible gun owner like me, not only do you take care of your firearm that's bolted down or secured in a safe or it's trigger locked, but you also prepare to protect and prevent people from getting access to your ammunition as well. So when we think about gun safety, that's all we're talking about this week, and it's all about the guns. Next week's show will be talking about space and space invaders and people that violate your space, and what space and distance and proxemics means in terms of safety. You can always reach me at my website, crimetimeradio.com. Send me an email, connect with me on Twitter, Dr. Steve Albrecht, or LinkedIn. You can find past episodes of the show on YouTube. So in our world, there are sheep and shepherds and wolves. Too many people are sheep and too few people are shepherds. You need to be a shepherd. There are a lot of wolves out there. There are not enough police officers or sheriff's deputies to protect us all. So you've got to take care of yourself, protect your family, your loved ones, your friends, and your coworkers. Pay attention and be prepared to defend yourself with legal force if necessary. Be a witness for the police, an excellent professional witness for the police if you see a crime. Stay safe and aware and alert at home, at work, at school, and even on the road. So as I always say here at Crime Time, I'm Steve Albrecht, and thanks for listening to What I Know Is Right.